All right, so hey everybody, we're here with Stephen Phillips. Stephen is currently the CEO of Mawson, that is an AI lab based in Australia, who is focusing on entertainment. Graduates from the Mawson lab are Techstars alumni Popgun and current Techstars company Replica and SuperRes. Previously, Stephen, and this is how I've come to know Stephen before actually knowing Stephen, was the founder and was running the popular music discovery website and platform called We Are Hunted, that people just called Hunted, that sold to Twitter in 2012. I loved Hunted, and I was blown away by a demo that I saw of Popgun last year when I met Stephen for the first time. And I can't wait to see what's coming next for those AI music companies. So, hey, Stephen.
Hi, how you going?
Cool. I'm good. I'm really happy to have you on the program. So just let's jump into it. Most people kind of know you for Hunted, and everybody's starting to know PubGun pretty quickly. But most people don't know that you are one of the, like one of the top engineers, definitely in music out there. And I'm very interested to understand how did you start being confronted with computers, with code, with building things. It's such a specific thing that you started to do. I think it would be inspiring to understand a little bit more of the background.
So I grew up on a cattle property in far northern Australia, pretty remote area. My father had been in the Air Force in Vietnam, and he had worked on Mirages and had become, well, we had horses and pigs and cattle and stuff like that. His hobby was making things and put things together. He had computers that he was fixing. He didn't really know what they were for, but he was making them because he was into electronics. And at about the age of 10, I remember he fixed the VIC-20, and I started programming on a VIC-20, and then a Commodore 64, and then an Amiga, and then an early PC and Macs. And so from about 1982 onwards, I was programming. Um, I did really poorly at school until grade 11 and 12 when I was sent away from to Canberra, which is the capital city in Australia, and I attended a science school for underperforming kids. I think it was. I'm not sure exactly why I was selected to go to it, but I met all these people who felt like my tribe, and I realised that I need to study so I can hang out with these people, not the people I was kind of going to school with. And I studied hard in grade 11 and 12. I did very well. I got into medicine, and I left North Queensland. I went to Brisbane, studied medicine for 2 years. It took me 2 years to realise that I shouldn't be doing medicine. I didn't like people that much, and I particularly didn't like sick people. So I decided I wouldn't do that. My parents weren't happy. My parents weren't happy with that decision at all. They decided to not support me, so I had to get a job. I got a job with the only other skill I had, which was programming. So this was in 1991 or 92. And in those days, programmers were third-class citizens at companies, effectively. I went along without any qualifications, but I could code, and I'd been coding for 10 years or more, and got a job, and then started earning like 100K as a 21-year-old running software teams. I eventually, within a year, was running teams. And so all the way then from all through my 20s, I worked in first doing software development in VB and then .NET, and then doing web stuff, and started to build websites, working for agencies, working in building websites for hire, basically. And we'd worked on hundreds of websites, as people do within agencies, small ones, big ones. I worked on front end, back end, design, middleware stuff, payment integrations, yeah, all different types of projects all through my 20s until mid-30s. I got kind of sick of that and wanted to do my own startup. I'd lived through the dot-com one boom and watched that kind of from the sidelines, being on the wrong side of the fence, getting paid to build sites for people who were having their shot at stardom, but always kind of envious that I'd never worked in a startup or had a chance to do that. And then I got a chance, not really a chance, I just decided with my wife, and I decided to do it when we were 35. something like that. We decided that this was now or never. So I just started building a startup literally in my garage, nighttime, weekends. And even back then, I was just always fascinated by the idea of wisdom of the crowds type stuff with the internet. What could we learn from processing what people were saying on the internet about things? And the first site that I built for myself was essentially a news site that aggregated news about the stock market and tried to predict what were going to be the most talked about companies and therefore what the most active stocks would be. I had no particular experience in finance, but it just seemed like something that people might find useful. So
I was
that
going
was
to
my
say,
first.
at this point, after working years, essentially almost as an independent developer, if you're working for an agency, you're going right, left, different projects, small, big, good ones, bad ones, well operating companies, bad operating companies, working with extremely good tech people, and sometimes finding a very bad internal team. You learn a lot. It's kind of working in a major music company or something. You work with so many artists, so many releases. You're a bit more low touch, but actually you're confronted by a lot more realities, and you can judge and understand what types of company you would want to build and what types of company you probably didn't want to build. I had no idea you did this thing in the stock market, and that is almost a great segue to Hunted, listening to the noise and listening what people to say to predict what would be the trend. Can you segue into Hunted at this point? Had you work on any music websites at the agency?
No, I played guitar in bands and stuff in my early 20s. I played music. Have I lost you? Never done anything in tech around that. The Hunted thing was complete chance. I'd met about a year into working out of my garage. I'd got to maybe 10, 20,000 users who were using the site regularly. And then I had a chance meeting with an investor who the timing was perfect. The synergy was perfect. He was one of Australia's richest men. He was just leaving. He was one of the winners in the .com one. He took his company public. He was leaving that company and he just wanted to invest in startups and do new things. And I met him literally the day that happened. We had lunch and we really hit it off. And he said he wanted to back me in what I was doing. And I didn't know it at the time, but he was very interested in news and he was hoping to establish a news presence in Australia. He's very progressive, left-wing kind of guy. And he just decided to work with me and he gave me enough money that I could go out and build a team. And so we worked in news for the first 2 years. And the segue into Hunted was in those 2 years, we built up the news site. It became one of the most popular sites in Australia. And just because of that, these two guys, Ben Johnson and Nick Crocker, who were in Brisbane, they had this idea that maybe music ranking and music charts would be better done if it was based on social media rather than record sales, which seems patently obvious now. But in 2008, it was a new idea. And
people have to remember YouTube was launched in 2007. Probably Facebook had no pages. It was the MySpace days. 2007 is not long for people like us, but it's actually long for the
Yes.
internet stuff. Yeah.
I remember we'd talk to people and go, yeah, we think we can do a Billboard style chart based purely on social media. And people were like, is that a thing? How would that work? Is that possible? Mm-hmm. And we were like, well, I don't know. We'll find out if that's possible. And it had lots of interesting properties because it didn't solve the cold start problem, but there was an idea that it would be closer to real time than record sales were. And it would be responsive to things that were happening in the zeitgeist and things that were happening. So when people were on tour or the MTV Awards were on or the Grammys, or it would be responsive to what people were searching for and looking for and talking about. And so it had lots of attractive properties. It was just at the time, we were lucky that we'd done nothing but blog and text aggregation, indexing, named entity recognition, search, ranking algorithms for 2 years. So when these guys said it, was like, yeah, sure. Like, how hard? Surely this is easier than doing the stock market. Turns out it's very different to doing the stock market. But at the time, we were able to produce the first version of Hunted I think it was in like 2 weeks or something, and release it because we'd built we just had all the tools in place, and we just needed to go out and find data, really. And we just didn't think it was anything until we released it, and it had one of those magical blow up things. We released it on a Thursday night, and Friday we woke up and everything was different. It was featured on, there was articles on Wired, it was featured on TechCrunch, which was the product hunt, I suppose, of the day. And on my inbox was full of music people, and people just loved it out of the gate. And
Did you work for like an agency for the launch, or did you literally switch from the tech to the, because you had the tech website, that website was already known locally. You switched to the music, and what happens? Like literally one day you launch, and do you send a massive email? Do you have people in the US speaking about you?
So Ben brought the design. So we had all the engineering. Bren brought a design, which is essentially a static screenshot of a grid, as in, we think there should be a grid with the artist's face on it, and you click on the face and it plays. That's the design. And we're like, sure, that makes sense to us. And Nick, who is now a partner at Blackbird in Melbourne, I think he broadcasted a bunch of music people he knew, and it just took off from there. There was no fanfare. It wasn't something we thought, oh, the world's going to love this. It was literally like, I hope this isn't embarrassing. Was kind of that people. We knew it was good because people really immediately resonated with two things. One, the idea that you could do this with social media was the first thing. And TechCrunch they were the first to coin the phrase. The headline on their article was, "We Are Hunted is the billboard for the new generation." And we were like, yeah, that's totally a great idea. We should have positioned ourselves just like that. And I've since met the people who wrote that in former lives, and they just loved it out of the gate too. And the second was music people were saying this is real, as in there's something in this direction, because this feels more like, because they were looking at charts based on record sales and everybody's stealing music, therefore these charts aren't right anymore. This was the first thing in a long time they said that this is what I thought was popular too. This is what I thought was cool. So we kind of felt we were onto something. And, there's a saying around product market fit that if you're not sure you've got it, you don't have it. Like, it was instant. It was like, people love this, and we have to kind of keep doing this. Whatever this is much better than the thing we were doing, because we'd invested lots of time, and we knew that it was Australian only, and there's a limited population here. And this was people reaching out from all around the world. Like, I can't remember, we were in the hundreds of thousands on launch day, on accidental launch day.
Yeah.
And so it was just one of those things where we'd work, like I'd been involved with hundreds of sites launching them, and nothing had ever done that. And I'd heard about that, but I'd never lived through that before. I haven't lived through that since, to be honest. It was something that people immediately loved.
I think you're right. The saying is right. If you think you might have product market fit, you definitely don't. It's one of those things, the day you do, it feels like the lottery, I guess. And everybody just tells you, you get emails, you get messages, you see the traffic, people are sharing it. Everybody's finding value, more value than even probably you thought you had. And I love the way you said the billboard headlines. You and I are like non-US people, and I guess they have the science of, we speak with very long sentences to say very short things. And sometimes those guys can nail a 5-word punchline that we wish we would have found. The billboard of the new generation, that must have been awesome. And especially 2007. Today, everybody's kind of thinking about new charts and algorithm.
That was around, I think it was like very early 2009 was that it actually got released. The company had been around for 2 years working on news before that. And then throughout 2009, we didn't do any more work on Hunted. So for the first 12 months of Hunted's life, we never touched the code again or did anything. Our investors were very, not unhappy, but very worried and cautious about what the music industry would do to people like us. They had no experience in the music industry, and neither had we. And as a tech person, the only thing we knew is they were shutting down sites and prosecuting the founders of these sites. And my investors were not up for that. They didn't think that was a good idea. So we didn't touch it. We continued doing news for a year. But at the end of that year, we hadn't really grown the news site that much. We concluded that we had the maximum coverage of the market in Australia. There was only 600,000 people in Australia who cared that much about financial news that they would do this. And Hunter had already gone, without touching it, had gone past that in traffic. And we knew that there was something here. And the first big startup lesson I had was at that moment when I had to go to the board and say, well, we didn't actually shut it down, but we didn't work on it. And look what's happened to this thing that we didn't invest in, that we didn't do any work on, and it outgrew the thing that we had spent $1 million on. We had told ourselves this fact that we would get sued, and we hadn't validated that. We hadn't gone out and tested that hypothesis. And this was the thing that was holding back the growth of this thing, that we were scared. So I had to work out how do you work out if you're going to get sued without getting sued?
I was going to say, how do you test that assumption? You go and ask people, will you sue me?
I don't know how the world works, man, but I remember I had the meeting and we decided I had to solve that. And I think literally within 24 hours, I got an email from a guy at MTV inviting me to go to New York to meet them. It was like as soon as we'd made the decision to explore this, the world aligned and out come this email. And I went to New York. I'd never left Australia before. I jumped on a plane. I went to New York. I met the MTV guys. I met the Sony guys, and everybody was cool. They were very much, oh, you're lucky it wasn't 3 years ago. But now we don't, no, we don't do that anymore. We're all over suing everybody, and now we want to embrace technology, and thank God you're here type stuff. So we had my first trip to New York was amazing. We were treated like rock stars, and somehow the fact that we'd taken all of our contact details and went into hiding for a year created this mystery about who are these people because the site was automated. It just ran itself anyway. It was just sitting on social media and then creating a chart, and it would update itself every 12 hours with this music chart. And it wasn't, and we did no press, and no one really knew who we were. And I don't even know how those guys in New York found out who we were. But it's just funny when that happens a lot. I'm sure you've done the same thing where you decide to go in a certain direction and things line up when it's meant to be. And those meetings all lined up. And then literally a month later, we decided to move the company from Brisbane to New York. That no one cares about us in Australia. And that made total sense because the music industry is in LA and New York. And back then, most of the label's headquarters were in New York, so we moved to New York to be closer to the action. And just to explore where this would take us. Was still no particular plan because we had, this was a site that was having millions of users, and we were just basically sitting on top of SoundCloud's API. We had no way of legally monetizing the site. We were even unsure exactly what we were doing was legal because we weren't sure SoundCloud knew whether what they were doing was legal either. So it was like a whole crazy house of cards. So I had all this. The site was incredibly popular and continuing to grow, and people loved it. And we released versions, and Twitter was in love with it. And all these label people would reach out, and they were using it for A&R. And I had this successful thing, but I had no plan to how do you monetize this thing? Like,
I was going to say, because everybody was using it. So either it was music lovers going to discover the website, and I know some of the numbers of the number of hours per day, and they're mind blowing. Maybe you can go over that a little later. A lot of A&Rs and agents and anybody working in music was kind of keeping an eye on it because that was the quickest chart. Like the artist would appear there first. It would be the trends that you would see maybe later on elsewhere. But you guys actually never really monetized the website. You had sometimes this thing in the middle to advertise a pusher, but that was more like free advertising that you would give people. So at this point, you're in New York, you have the funding, the website, the traffic is going up, the sessions, I think, what is it, 8 hours per day or like 4 hours per day, but like crazy long sessions. The market is looking at you. And obviously, you kind of realize that you started this news site that became this music site that became this juggernaut. What's the thinking process? You're literally in the middle of the music industry, while a couple of years earlier have never really worked in the music industry. What's going through your mind, and maybe a segue to the exit story at Twitter? What made you think, all right, this is the end of a cycle. Let's like do something else. Let's change let's flip the company.
Yeah, so in New York, I was just totally obsessed I was totally obsessed about solving what is the business model if you've got a music discovery site that has these loyal fans who are spending a long time on the site, and clearly people enjoy what it is, but yet I don't own the content, and the people I'm streaming it from, I'm not sure they know who owns it either, and that seems really unclear. What is the plan here? And I didn't know the music industry well enough to work out what the path was. So I spent months, and I had a funding process of my own. The investors, they hadn't signed up to do a music site. This isn't what it was easy to monetize the new stuff. We had won contracts with banks and big organizations who were paying for, but who's paying for this music thing? Like, sure, it's treble whatever the traffic of our news thing, but how does this end? Like, they couldn't work. They had no experience, and they basically pushed it back on that we're not funding this anymore because we don't understand where this goes. So you have to find, and this wasn't a bad moment. This was going to my early investor and saying, I think this is really important. I don't understand it. You don't understand it. We need a strategic investor who does understand it. So I had to try and meet music investors and understand what would you do in this case. And a lot of people had ideas of what to do. And I did in the end up meeting a guy in New York who he had a very clear vision for it. And he was the first one who was able to articulate. And he was the first one who kind of showed me that Hunted wasn't a music discovery site. It was a brand that meant cool. And you can do a lot with that in music. You can, you can have merchandise, or you can run festivals, or you can go into colleges. And he had a vision for it that he was just a random guy I met through a bunch of intros, and he sat down and laid it out. And he showed me that I was just thinking way too narrow about what we actually had, and that this was just a way, you'd built up equity in this thing that was that people really connected with, and you could monetize that in other ways rather than directly with music. And how much music is about that, is about the brand and the personality and things like that. The time on site stuff was strange. Like for the first year and a bit, we didn't really know. We had lots of ideas about what were the levers of growth for the site. It seemed to keep growing, but we weren't sure why or how. And then we kind of realized after a bit of experimentation that we thought we were this discovery thing, but no, we're actually a radio station, and we're just a very cool radio station that changes every day. And that there was another metric. And so we basically, if that's true, we started measuring time on site. And we went from like 20 minutes to 40 minutes. And over the course of about 18 months, we drove it up to about 8 hours, we'd worked out how to reorder the chart. We were less concerned with the idea of this is a chart a chart implies that the music's getting worse across time. So we didn't want that, because we could see that if we loosened the idea this was a chart and this was more a music discovery experience, we would keep people engaged longer. Like they would tolerate, I can't remember what it was, but we ran experiments where people would tolerate like one bad song every 3 or something. So
what do you consider the bad? I mean, where Hunted was all about social popularity. So like already the concept of you guys thinking like this is a good song and like a retention song, and this is a bad song, it's really thinking like a radio, or thinking like a playlist person at Spotify today.
Yes.
Like the ultimate fresh finds
right.
playlist, so to speak.
Yes, that's right. You mean, how did we measure that, what we thought was good?
Yeah, I mean, obviously you knew when people were leaving the website, so I guess it was more of an objective metric, like a bad song is a song that people skip. It was not like a bad song is a song that Stephen Phillips doesn't like. But yeah,
yes, that's right. It turned out it was a combination of 3 things. The first was we did canonically still have a chart. We knew what the most popular stuff was. We had honed that technique pretty well. And we had an API that music companies were using that was the actual chart that they could use to, and we published monthly reports or something like this on the site where we published the real data. But we found that there was a big drop-off after you got to 20 or 30 or something like that. So we combined it with 2 things. Once we also found, I think you and I have talked about this, there was something about the imagery and the song that meant something to users too. And we could tell what type of images people would engage with and how people would listen and discover with their eyes as well, which seems funny for a radio thing. But we knew that and I remember certain bands who immediately had awesome-looking photos that people would immediately engage with and start their radio station experience with that. And mostly it was just people who looked really strange, I suppose, or creative or outgoing or different. And the second was we measured skip rates really high, that people would – we made it really easy. People could skip to the next one. And we had a ranking thing based on which songs people listened right through to. And I understand that's how Spotify does their stuff. It seems a pretty obvious way to work out which songs really are sticky. We didn't have to have it personalized because we had such aggressive turnover that it wasn't like we created a chart just for you or experience just for you. We did have a section of the site that did that, and we experimented with personalization, but overwhelmingly it was the main chart that people enjoyed the most.
And I guess it's kind of if you turn into like your favorite cool radio, you kind of expect them to have an editorial view that they're gonna show you, and you go there to discover new stuff. There's a place for personalization, and Spotify is showing the way on that. But pure editorial recommendation is still extremely strong in the world of music. It's probably 95% still of recommendation. If you take away the Discover Weekly release radar, a few playlists are starting to get personalized in Spotify, but the big majority of cross DSP is editorial. People are frozen in front of too much choice. If you give them a choice from 10 things, they're going to take what they usually know. So when you go to a music discovery, especially if you don't know what you're facing, you kind of expect it to be pushed to you. Yeah, the thing about the photos when we discussed it, I thought was fascinating. And actually, when you were saying it, just thought it's the same thing now on YouTube. There's the videos on the right side when you're watching a video, and the YouTube people, like the best practices are change the preview image until you see that you have a bit of an uptake. Some images are more clear, more dark, more colorful. You can have the text on the image, like typical YouTubers would have their face and then some kind of big title on them. And that, I guess, if everybody's doing the same covers today, is because there's a general consensus that on YouTube, those covers are way better than just a still or a screenshot of the actual video. Yeah, you guys were basically using a lot of portraits, and every band had their identity, but somehow the website looked like it had a branding, like it was just not random photos of any band. It had their faces. There was more like a head of Spotify than a single cover.
And that was very much a design process as part of it, of songs and artists making onto our chart. There was a designer called Adrian who went with us to Twitter, and it's now a designer at Lyft. He was the curator of all of that, and he was a Nazi about the types of photos that would make it to the site. There was a style to that, and we just appreciated on feedback on the site, especially because we were competing with Hype Machine, who was much more text-based, or they had a different layout to us, and ours was very visual. So we really wanted to go down that path and make that a clear. And we also because we got so much feedback from design agencies who were using the site, and they were using it, broadcasting it across the whole company. And we know that they appreciated that design stuff like that as well. So the other people who are doing it really well is you see that Netflix is doing the same thing. And their interface is very Hunted-esque, as in, I don't want to say that we inspired that, but it's the same idea that they get they change the image of it to appeal to you to go and watch that show, and they're finding headshots and stuff and dramatic scenes in those things, and I'm sure they're doing the same testing stuff as well.
And the last thing Netflix wants you to do is search, because that means you're kind of looking what repertoire they have, what don't they have. So if you search and they don't have it, they recommend another movie from the same actors. They're very smart about that. But it's basically a browse experience based on what they think you're gonna like, what you've watched before, things that you started watching, new episodes, and it's kind of pushed into a recommendation engine rather than a search. In order for it to be a search, you need to basically have everything. So yeah.
I think it was also something to do with the users too. Like, we concluded there was about back in 2011 when it was at its peak, that we were maybe having 3 or 4 million users, and we thought there was about 10 million of them in the world. So 10 million, as in, these are people who care so much about music, they have to be first, and they have to know what's cool before everybody else does. So they weren't wanting a personalized experience too. They prided themselves on having a depth of knowledge of new music, so they wanted to hear it all. And even though they weren't into that particular thing or that they didn't like that style. Because of who they were and music was such part of their identity amongst their peer group or whatever, they had to know all this stuff. So it wasn't about they were happy to consume all types of stuff. They just wanted it to be current and new. So the currency we sold was freshness and coolness type of thing. We had that, like you said, we were early. That was a huge priority for us. We had to be first because that's what we felt our audience wanted. They wanted to get it and see it before others saw it.
I find it interesting as well. You mentioned Hive Machine, and a lot of competing companies want to, compete and do the same. Like we're going to do the same, but a little bit faster, or the same, but a little bit better. You guys were literally doing completely two different visual experiences. The idea is using the website for music discovery. The ways you're doing it are different, and we don't have time here to go into the way they do it and the way you did. But the layout and the experience is completely radically different, and you create a lot more emotions with the users if you have your real identity rather than we're both the same and people can't really know. And I think to be honest, the website of Hunted, it's still very contemporary today. Like people are still building websites. You had the lateral scroll, if I remember, instead of the vertical scroll that I saw on a website a few months ago, and it still looked cool. It still looks different. So yeah,
And when that was when we were, I remember Jess Hutter at Joseph Mark designed version 3 of Hunted like that. And she came to us with that. And everyone was like, are we really going to do that? The horizontal scrolling. Like as developers, we're like, everybody hates horizontal scrolling sites. But at some level, we just kind of felt, nah, fuck it. Like if we can't, who can do this? So it'll be different to everybody else. Let's do it. And people loved it when we released it. We polished the hell out of it. And the guy who did that JavaScript craziness so that it would scroll on your mouse and accelerate as you got to the edge and all this stuff. We labored over that stuff so hard for a week or so just to get it because we knew people were going to hate it. And it had to work perfectly, all browsers, right off the gate, so that you could have this continuous scrolling of new music thing. Anyway, it worked pretty well. We never got near, like Hype Machine, I think, was still at 6, 7. We knew we were competitive, but in the end, I felt like we were just we were just appealing to a different discovery experience. I'm sure people use both, but most of the feedback we had were from creators and stuff who were not at the extreme end of the music. Like they didn't want to talk about the music, they just wanted to consume it. So I don't think we never really, and they'd been around years before us, and they're still around now. And they outlived us. They started before us. We never got near their numbers. The other thing was interesting was how, which I've learned a lot from, was because we had those metrics. It took us a while, 18 months, to discover what those metrics were about what were the levers that were actually moving the site. It allowed us to actually change 2 or 3 times what the algorithm was that powered the chart. And it wasn't just changing the math of it. It was more like we changed conceptually what we thought music ranking should be. I remember version 1, it was all about aggregate scores of mentions or deltas of change in number of mentions across time, like really traditional approaches to how you would measure what the most popular thing is. And then we kind of moved off on that, and we realized that mentions or listens aren't equal, and some people have better taste than other people, and that we should be taking that account. So we started to weight mentions, and depending on who mentioned it, they had more weight than others. And then we kind of realized in the third version, which was we went from like an hour and a half to 8 hours, was the big breakthrough for us, was realizing actually we're measuring the wrong thing. Everybody thinks we're measuring music. We're not. We should be measuring fans, and that we should find who has the best taste in music. And we developed an algorithm around that, as in, of the people who are talking about music now, which of those have the best taste? And then when I say best taste, which ones are able to predict what's going to be popular months from now? And because we had 2 years of data about what people were listening to and what happened on the major charts, like on iTunes and Billboard, we knew who was best at predicting it. And so the site completely changed its algorithm around not caring so much about what people were saying on music, but who had the best taste, who was best able to predict the future, and what were they listening to today. And we saw just explosion of time on site around that, which is really early work on, and it eventually led to the Twitter stuff, really early ideas around influencers and who is actually an influencer in the music industry. And in the end, I can't remember the numbers, but I remember we looked back and there was like 60 to 80 people in the world who were the best at predicting what was going to happen next. And when we occasionally dig in who those people were, and we love the idea because that group of 50 to 80 people were in flux all the time, as you'd expect. Like these people now have the baton, and they're the cool kids, and they're the ones who are deciding what's going to be popular. But overwhelmingly, most of them worked in the music industry, which is probably, there were moments where we realized perhaps we're just measuring a game system. These people are the people who make the music.
Yeah.
And therefore, what are we eating our own dog food here?
Yeah, it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. You're speaking to a person and he doesn't know, but he's feeding the algorithm himself.
That's right. And we kind of feel like, oh, we've just really uncovered how the music industry works. These people who are promoting it, they're the ones who made it. Now they're good at predicting it because they made it. And anyway, so yeah, we were in New York. So I'll talk about how the acquisition happened. We didn't really look for acquisitions. We'd been approached, not because we just didn't understand how that happens. Like it sounded like a black art to us. Like you'd heard of companies being acquired, but until you, like, it just didn't feel like something that was possible because we didn't make any money and we didn't understand how.
Like who to call, like hi Twitter, I want to be acquired. Yeah,
that's right. We had for quite a while, but because we'd run out of money, we were the team to keep the team together and see if we could work out how to find investors to take it forward. We were doing work. We were guns for hire. We were doing work for Sony. We built MTV stuff. We worked on MySpace. We did a project with Microsoft, and we were well known in that space. And that contributed a lot. So two things contributed to the acquisition. One was big companies knew who we were. Was building great stuff and doing it quickly. And the second was as soon as we started to raise and we then found funding and went down that path, that triggered a whole lot of urgency around, look, if you're going to get them, you've got to get them now because they'll be off the market for 2 or 3 years. So, a lot of that acquisition talk started to come out of the fundraising process as well, which I believe is not, and I've been on the other side of the fence now at Twitter and the M&A, and that's not a coincidence. That's part of the process. It just accelerates because they had been watching us for 6 months or more, and hearing that VCs were now ready to invest in the company and take it forward triggers them to make a decision, or at least trigger them to make an approach to see how serious we were. Was this the time to get us? And so the acquisition came pretty much out of the blue. One of the guys in M&A at Twitter just contacted us, and he'd been running a project for 6 months or more to acquire a music company to help build Twitter Music, which was the project he was running. He came to New York and saw me, said, "This is what we're going to do. Is this something you're into?" And we were like, "Yeah, sure." Like this is as good an exit ending to this story as I could imagine. It had been a lot of work and a lot of kind of emotional stuff to move countries and to move young families. The investors, my new investors, were kind of umming and ahhing about whether they wanted to follow on with the new investors. Again, they still didn't know anything about the music industry. Why would we invest alongside these American dudes who are in the music industry? And we would rather if we could. So when I said, look, these are the options, we can continue bringing new investors, going on this new adventure, or Twitter's 6 months away from an IPO, they've made an offer, we can swap our stock for theirs. The investors were like, there's no answer, we have to go. And everybody was kind of happy with that this is probably how the story ends. It was literally 2012 it happened. We'd been going since, Hunted had been alive since 2009. I started in my garage in 2005, so it had been 7 years. And since the time I sat in the garage and my wife talked about it, to being in New York and selling to Twitter. And so the process after that was Richard and I. Richard was my co-founder. We left New York. We were both living in there. We'd been there 8 months, something like that. We went to San Francisco. We met the executive at Twitter, Dick Costello, and a bunch of other guys. We had to pitch what we were and what the company was. And, I was super nervous to do that pitch. I don't know, what do you pitch at this point? Hey, I built this thing, people love it. I don't know what the next step is.
And I was going to say, it's very counterintuitive. When you're in the process of being in an acquisition, you're meeting people that are maybe not the first person you're speaking to from the company. And so then you have to re-pitch your business to people, and when they've been the one reaching out to you, so you're like, wait, are you guys interested, or am I supposed to pitch again? What's this?
I think they wanted to just know, like they knew more about me they knew more about us and what we did than I could have told them in a pitch. It was just like, I think they just wanted to just see we were human and how we would handle that situation of being, because they didn't give us a heads up. I remember walking into a boardroom that was full of these dudes who I'd read about and being intimidated by it, but just thinking, well, surely this was meant to be. This is how this story ends. I'll just tell them the story like I'm telling it to you now, and they'll either like it or they're not. There's nothing I can do. I can't lie about it. There's nothing I can say that's going to change their opinion. And they would just and as you learn when you go and meet these people, they're just dudes, right? And they're being honest and not selling, just being totally humble about what you've done and what you want to do next is the answer every time. And we just immediately clicked. Like as I said, they already knew. They'd already made the decision. They were just trying to probably assess whether it was a good fit, whether this was something we really wanted to do, and the circumstances around that. But yeah, from the moment they started talking to us, it was basically, I don't think there was ever a moment where we thought, oh, this is going to fall through. It was like in the first 5 minutes it was on and that was it. It was never Kevin, who was the guy I was negotiating with, who, they went through diligence on the tech and they went through diligence on the team, and they had to get visas, and it wasn't easy. And then we had to negotiate on price and do all this stuff. But it was never a threatening thing. Like, it was always like, yeah, they made us feel like we were like, Twitter was an accident somehow as well. And, their story was very similar. And it was also, they were going up to an IPO. So everyone was very excited at Twitter. Everyone knew that they were, back then in 2012-ish, there was this feeling that they were going to be the next Facebook, or this could be anything. And there was a very positive vibe around the company. I don't know how it is now, but back then they were like the voice of the Arab Spring, and they were rescuing children, and there was a real positivity about it. And it was just a very easy thing to do. So we moved to
2012 is way before any social media backlash, any kind of Facebook, Cambridge Analytica. 6 months before going into a company that goes into 6 months before an IPO is an amazing time if you're at a startup that went there. Most people on the executive board were probably there for a little while, and they knew that something great was going to happen for them and for the company as well. So yeah, it must have been it's a much different thing to be acquired in an M&A that is more of a merger of two competing companies, or in a down market where there's consolidation. You guys were literally the music arm going in this soon to be IPO'd company, and you guys were also, even if not making revenue from everybody looking from the outside, you guys were a company going up with traffic and discovery, very central. And I guess, especially in 2012, Twitter was very about verified badges, verified artists, ambassadors, influencers, and that was a great strategic fit in between the two companies. Can you talk a little bit, because I know there is a company called Hydric today that is almost a spin-off from some of the people at Hunted. Some of you guys went into the company, and that was you had quite a lot of surprises also after you got in. Could you tell about this? Because nobody really knows. It's pretty rare for a company to almost split it out right before it's acquired.
Well, we weren't that big, People didn't know how big we actually were. I can't remember how many, maybe max 15 people at one point. There was a core of about 8 to 10 at any point. We had contractors a lot to come on and do because this was Hunted kind of the third, fourth era where we out of money, so therefore we had to do contract work while we maintained the site that was growing. And I met Owen McCarthy, who worked for Hunted, and David Lowry, who came. And, by this time, we had contracts with Sony and MTV to build serious sites for them. And one of the challenges we had was Twitter showed up. They don't want us building Sony's site or doing MTV. Like, what do we do with these people who had been really kind and supportive to us? Like, we didn't want to leave them in the lurch. But as it turned out, luckily, Owen and lucky for them, I'm not sure how it plays out, Owen and David they were Irish and they didn't have Australian passports or US citizenship, so they couldn't come on the visas. Something was weird with Irish visas at the time. So they couldn't come to the acquisition. We couldn't support the clients that we had. So they started the idea was, I said to them, look, it's really, it's a shame you can't come to Twitter and do the acquisition. But what about you start a company, you can have all of our clients and see where that takes you. And that's essentially what happened. They started Hydric. They took over our contracts with those companies. And since then, they've survived and grew the company. They became specialists at doing services work in the music industry and helping. They work with Spotify and they continue to do work with Sony and all these other brands in the music industry. They had been kind of, I think they joined the last year of Hunted's life as well. So they weren't like early core members of the team, but they would have went with us. When the acquisition came, when we were negotiating price, it was all about headcount because it was really an acqui-hire. They weren't interested in keeping Hunted alive. They wanted the biggest engineering team they could have who knew something about music tech. What you said was true. They were thinking about trying to take on Billboard or Nielsen, and they knew that, and they said it multiple times, we think we can build a music chart ourselves, but people might not believe it. If you come in and build it for us, everyone will believe it. So that was really why we were acquired. So when they launched a competitor to Billboard, which they didn't in the end, they did integration with Billboard, but if they decided to, and because their whole idea was, can we get musicians to equate Twitter activity with success? Mm-hmm. So let's do a chart. And if we release this, musicians might go, oh, that's a bit naff. But if we acquire Hunted and Hunted becomes Twitter Music as a chart thing powered only by tweets, then people would go, well, of course this is real because they like the other thing. So that was their whole play. And it made total sense to us as well. So and we liked that it was an acqui-hire. They wanted the engineering, which is their main attraction, but there was also some value they were getting out of Hunted, if only credibility. They could tell that story. And it solved the liability problem for me of I never worked out how to monetize it, and they weren't interested in taking that problem on. Pre-IPO, they didn't want to deal with this. So one of the only sticking points we had in the negotiations was I had to indemnify Twitter against the music industry should they come looking for and they, by then the music industry, I'd only ever had really positive experiences with them. They'd used the site, loved what it did, found artists, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I just didn't have any negative experience with that at all.
I think the where you got maybe lucky a little is you were just under the scale level where there's just too many people listening to free music. But also it was not just people listening to free music. You are actually helping a lot of people sign. I actually know Fantagram, who was signed by Nate Albert. I think Nate used We're Hunted, like from a discussion with him a couple of years back. Like some pretty big bands were discovered by Hunted from pretty big labels. So it's very hard. On one hand, you're like trying to sign the act that you discovered, and then your business affair is like sending a lawyer type. So yeah, you were maybe right at the good spot.
I think we were too small, and I think the audience was also really passionate music people. So it wasn't like we were crossing over into top 40 stuff.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It was indie, it was cool, it was like it was music people, and I felt like they just like, well, this is for us. Like, you know what I mean? They're not trying to be a massive. We weren't. I think Groove Shark was the one that blew up while we were there, and they went after pop and mass audience, and we were like, oh, good luck with that. Like,
yeah,
putting crosshairs.
Yeah, they were going. They were going very far, Groove Shark. They were re-uploading songs. They were using torrent and P2P. Like it was completely other type of scale as well. And I think philosophy of company, to be honest.
Yes, that's right. We were just more into, we were very technical, and we were fascinated by the problem of how you measure virality, or how you measure. Like, I spent way too long, and I continue to think about the problem of why do I like this song, and that I think it's a problem you can work on forever, and it's it's one of the key ways I still attract young engineers to work in music is, why does it do this? Why do I like that song and not this song? And how can I do that so easily? How can I flick through the radio dial and immediately hear that I'll like that when I've heard 2 seconds of it? What is
Yeah.
going on here? Like, how does this work? And software engineers, well, the ones who want to work in machine learning, find those problems fascinating. And music is the very pure expression of that problem. Like, what is going on here? Like, how does this possibly work? And can we get computers to emulate that? I got fascinated with that at Hunted, and so after I left Twitter, that's what I started to keep working on. Like, how can I get better at this, or how do I solve this problem? You know?